Gloria here representing the Party for Socialism and Liberation. And I understand there was also something took place, a lot of people in Oakland, there was a lot of cheering about what we hope is the defeat of Donald Trump and, his retirement into history. But the votes have been counted now, as they say, and now we need to know, will the votes count or will it be 6-3 or some such thing? But at any rate, that's what's going on here. And I always like to start, we always like to start our programs with a quote from Karl Marx, because we disagree on many things, but we all agree that on the importance of Karl Marx and the belief that his work will remain as important for the class struggles of the future as they have been in the past. And here's my quote. It's from the Communist Manifesto today. The first step in the revolution by the working class is to raise the proletariat to the position of ruling class, to win the battle for democracy. And as we know, that's going to be a prolonged struggle. And I'm very happy that we have Gloria here. I've been a fan of Gloria for some time, way back into the 30 years when I first became close to her party. And I've always looked to them for clarification in the ongoing class struggle. And as a point of disclosure, I will say that I did vote for Gloria, and I also contributed to her campaign with some of the meager financial resources. So I'm really happy that she's here and taking time out of her schedule, because I know her work is not over. So let me turn it over to Roger to take control and moderate the program.
Roger, before you begin, let me do this technical thing. I'm going to mute everybody except for those who are officially to speak, so that background noise doesn't disturb us. Okay, just give me a moment and I will do that.
Thanks.
Okay, and I want to thank everybody for coming, and thank Gene for doing most of the introduction. But we're very happy to have Gloria La Riva as our speaker today, and she will give us a perspective on the election from a working class and socialist background. And that's a very important perspective. And Gloria is uniquely qualified to do that. At age 24, she became a member of the International Topographic Union and has been a labor organizer ever since, and active in the labor union movement. She is uniquely qualified, something that most of us can't say, because she actually did run for president. Most recently, she was on the ballot in 15 states, which is an extremely large accomplishment for a left candidate to get on the ballot because of the ballot repression. And hopefully, Gloria will speak to the future of left parties on the ballot and some of the ballot repression that has been in this recent election. In California, she ran on the ballot line of Peace and Freedom Party, which is the only explicitly socialist party on the California ballot. And previous to that, she ran in the 2016 election also as a candidate for the Party of Socialism and Liberation. And in 2016, she received more votes as a socialist than anybody had done since 1976. She is one of the founding members of the Party of Socialism and Liberation and on their political leadership. And she's been active in so many struggles that it would take most of this program just to go through all her many accomplishments. But to mention a few, she's been very much an anti-war activist and around Central America, Iraq, Palestine, Afghanistan, and Yugoslavia. She was instrumental in the struggle to free the 5 Cuban heroes, and she received the Cuba's Friendship Medal in 2010. And she's also been a real activist around the issue of supporting Venezuela against imperialism. And in 2019, Gloria did a national speaking tour on Venezuela. Immigrant rights, etc., have been many of the struggles that she's been tirelessly involved in. But rather than for me to go on any further, I would like to introduce and welcome Gloria to our program. Please begin.
Thank you, Roger, and thank you, Raj, and thank you, Jean, for having this event and for inviting me. It's good that it was time for now because it took several days to find out who would be the president. And yesterday, I, plus many of my members of the PSL, were in the march in San Francisco because we were also celebrating the defeat of this extreme white supremacist, racist, and everything that you could attach to a description of Trump. Because even though one could say that there's very little difference between the Republicans and Democrats, it is also true that in the last 4 years that Trump has been a particular catalyst in a deeper polarization, in whipping up racism, in particular, not just the issue of polarization, but really creating an extremely racist atmosphere against Mexicans and all other immigrants, against Black people, against the Black Lives Matter movement, supporting the white supremacists to the hilt. And so the vote would have been, I think, extremely problematic if he had won by either the popular or the electoral vote. And as much as he boasted, you could see that these 4 years of painfully watching such a reactionary bigot and seeing that the Democrats really had no playbook of struggle against him by any means. What they concentrated on in the first years was Russiagate, that utterly false accusation, and then the impeachment, which only served to confuse people. And then in this year, with the early months of primary, we could see that despite huge audiences of tens of thousands for Bernie Sanders that could be called in a day or two's notice, while Biden was maybe reaching a few dozen people in a cafe, that the Democrats would rather have risked the chance that Trump would win than Sanders be the nominee, because he would raise the expectations and make demands of the system that even as a capitalist, as a social democrat, that still they were demands the ruling class is in no way willing to struggle for or defend in terms of the Democrats. And so on the verge of the pandemic sweeping the US, he was defeated. Bernie Sanders was defeated by the collaboration of all the other remaining Democrats. And that's where we were at this year, was the possibility that Trump could win. And yet Trump himself did himself in. He did himself in, as we know, by his extreme cavalier attitude toward the pandemic that was really only evident in the last weeks after he got sick, pulled off his mask, told people, you can overcome this, don't be afraid of COVID. Trump, in fact, did himself in. And yet it was very close for the first 2 days of the election, because essentially Biden's main drawing point was, he said, I'm not with Trump. I will unite the country without really any specifics, except to say that he would draw up a plan on COVID. And now we see what's taken place behind the scenes, revealed to the public for those who care to look, of the differences now in the Democratic Party, railing against the left, the more progressive elements in the Democratic Party, a small number, but saying you are the ones who caused us from being able to win the majority Senate. And that will be their narrative, is that they're not able to continue with changing the economy, improving on overturning some of the things that Trump did because they don't have a majority in the Senate. And so that's where we're at, sisters and brothers. We are at the place where those of us who are on this call know Biden's history in the imperialist circles of the Senate, of voting for every military war budget, of supporting the installation by the US of the neo-fascist government of Poroshenko and overthrowing Yanukovych in Ukraine, just being part of the Obama administration, in addition to his previous history in helping increase mass incarceration, his racist policies, helping usher in Clarence Thomas. There's a lot to say about that. And maybe people can comment on that in this discussion. But in essence, why we ran and announced last year that the PSL would run and that we would seek the California Peace and Freedom Party nomination was because, as we did in 2008 and 12 and 2016, that we see the president as the executive of the imperialist system, and that is his role, his, or perhaps in the future her role, that their role is to defend the maximization of profits and to follow the State Department, the foreign policy, the Pentagon dictates that the US can let no other power in the world even come close to being the dominant military and economic power in the world. Although the US is slipping, has slipped greatly in recent decades, it still intends to war, sanctions, and other means of pressure, occupation to maintain that role. And that's why in 2008, for example, when Obama ran for the first time, and there was so much euphoria and pressure from people, from the liberals to others who said you must all be all in for Obama because he represents a hope. Now we can see what happened: the overthrow of Honduras and the beginning of the unraveling of the leftward developments in Latin America due to that, and which led to the ability of Trump to tighten on the blockade on Cuba and to use the instrument of the executive order by Obama in 2015 against Venezuela. There's so much to say. Record deportations, the signing of legislation that would allow what was called the sequester of Social Security and Medicare. We could go on and on and on, but it didn't bring progress. And yet there's this very short-term memory when it comes to US elections on the part of liberals and many progressive. A lot of people look at the PSL and say, when they come to our events, when they see our presence in the demonstrations in any state of the country that we're in, they always marvel at how many young people there are in our group. It's essentially overwhelmingly young people. And that is because I think that our independence as a political organization and not falling into the electoral trap of the Democrats, of which many have fallen in over the years, leftist organizations, you could call the Communist Workers' Party and others who just became absorbed and became Democrats. Look at the former mayor, Lee of San Francisco, or Jean Quan of Oakland. They used to be communists. And yet that's the great role of as the co-opting role of the Democratic Party. But we have maintained our independence. And in these 16 years of our existence, in a specific time when young people, of course, older people are drawn into the elections like a super magnet and trying to find a way through the next 4 years, the campaign, for example, of Bernie Sanders was a great, great inspirer. And if you look at our applications, we have a system where young people who apply, and some older people, but mostly young people, and they're asked, how did you join? Well, they were first involved. Many of them were first involved in the Sanders campaign, became disillusioned, or didn't know about socialism, began to study it because of the curiosity by the issues that Sanders raised. All of this process showed that you can't be abstentionist in the US elections if you're a socialist, and that you can't get drawn into the Democratic Party trap. While also not letting the Republicans off the hook for their warlike stance as well, anti-worker stance. So I think this year, we were very, very glad to run in the elections. I was very honored to be the candidate to be nominated by Peace and Freedom Party. And I'm so glad too that Peace and Freedom is having a healthy comeback, has more than 100,000 registrants, has had much more of a presence, more people are interested, and that I think we contribute greatly to that, not just as a presidential, but congressional and other down ballot offices that we have run in, as well as other candidates. For example, in 2018, or no, this year in the primaries, the candidate, I can't remember her name, but she ran in Oakland, and that was a great campaign for them. So I just want to say that as Roger said, we, for the most part, petitioned to get on those 15 states during the pandemic. California was already another process of the convention and the delegates that had to be elected in the Central Committee elections of the primary. But the other states from New Mexico, which required 6,000 signatures, to New Jersey, 2,000, Minnesota, which required 4,000 for us to collect, Washington State, 2,000, all over the country. It required a lot of dedication, a lot of careful approach in this pandemic to make sure that people were not afraid to be approached by us with our tables, with our hand sanitizer. The whole program that we had enabled us to achieve 15 states, 13 states on write-in. And we've been asked by people, what is the vote total? We say patience, even more patience than seeing what happened with the Democrats and Republicans, because the third party votes and the remaining votes of states that just stopped after it was clear that Biden was the winner or Trump was the winner in their state, they will take days and weeks more. For example, California has until November 17, I think even the end of the month, to report. But we've seen an inching up, and please, without anyone publicizing it, so far we have 69,000 votes, and in 2016 we had 74,000. I do think we're going to go past that number. We also see that the phenomenon, although we are in more states now than last time, that the phenomenon of Biden and this huge switch from undecided people to the Biden camp after this debacle with Trump and making a show of his surviving the illness really disgusted people, and you could see a big switch over. And I think that really affected a lot of people. I mean, I know people who are dear friends of ours who are socialists, and yet they said, I'm sorry, but I had to vote for Biden, even in California. So it's okay. We can't erase that phenomenon. There's a big issue that we're brought up with, not only your vote, the value of your vote, but the viability of a candidate. And yet, of course, we make it clear that's not the role. That's not our role in the elections. We couldn't hope to get anywhere near having a major influence at this point because of what we offer, the program that we have, the program of struggle, the program of only socialism. More than ever, more urgent than ever, only socialism can resolve these crises of the existential crisis of the climate collapse. And every day in this whole year, it's evident that it's getting worse and worse, almost irreversible in many factors. The melting of the north and south ice poles and the caps and glaciers, the ocean's destruction, the loss of sea life, global warming, the fires in California, the whole Pacific West Coast, the hurricanes. And by the way, I think a highlight of our campaign was that I traveled to 46 cities in 32 states, almost entirely during the pandemic. The only real foray that we made in the early part of the year was going to South Dakota, to Minnesota, to Wisconsin, to Illinois, but particularly in late January to Pine Ridge Reservation, to Rapid City, South Dakota, where we had many, many encounters with the native community, the Lakota, and seeing more close up with the devastation of the theft of U.S. land, of the violation of native treaties, violation of their sovereignty. You see the hills that was part of the Great Sioux Nation Treaty of the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, 6 years later being completely stolen because of the discovery of oil and other minerals. And to date, when we were there was a hearing in Rapid City for people to come and give their opinion on the opening of massive uranium mining through liquefying the uranium in the grounds of the Black Hills to extract it for more war, for more weapons production, while the people in Pine Ridge, the land that used to be theirs, and people on Pine Ridge Reservation have an income of maximum $3,500 a year in a family. So these were the kind of things we brought up. The demand to defend the Indian Child Welfare Act that most people aren't even aware of anymore, but which is right now in the Supreme Court docket to possibly overturn that, the right of Native sovereignty to raise their children in their land, among their people, in their culture. So these are the kind of things we did. We had a highly internationalist position of demanding an end to the blockade of Cuba, an end to the sanctions on Venezuela, return the stolen wealth, and stop the coup attempts against Venezuela, no sanctions on Iran. Just so much to say. The 10-point program that we raised of a national plan that can still be implemented against COVID, of using the Defense Production Act, which was implemented in the Korean War to massacre 4 million Koreans, but could be used now in national defense, true national defense, to build the hospitals that are needed in this country. If China could do it, we could do it many times more with the wealth in this country. The release of funds for every family to be able to survive economically, hazard pay, double, triple hazard pay for the essential workers, full rights for all the immigrants, and special rights immediately for all those immigrant workers who have been providing the food, for example, the farm workers, the packing house workers, and on and on. So I'm sure there's much more to say. We saw now the sped up nomination and approval of Amy Coney Barrett, an extreme reactionary who poses a great danger in this highly anti-democratic, dictatorial Supreme Court, to try to overturn any progressive legislation or to carry out measures, the rulings against the people of the US. But again, the only way to change is not depending on electing the Democrat or Republican or another capitalist, but to fight for socialism. We think that with the growth in consciousness of people in this country of seeing socialism more favorable than not, and capitalism as a cause of the crises is very favorable to us. And that's why, again, I want to say, to have abstained in this election would have been absolutely absurd. I want to point out that the Revolutionary Communist Party, the RCP, which could be regarded perhaps as ultra-leftist, always regarded the US elections as a sham, as we do too, but a sham from which you can play absolutely no part. They went all in this year to call for Biden's election, as if the alternative would have been fascism. That's been their line ever since Bush, that without removing Bush, there would be fascism. There were liberals who said it will be the end of democracy if Trump is elected again. And that really is interpreting it, they would say that it would be fascism, fascist rule. We disagree. It's highly reactionary, but it's not possible without the Democrats. It's not possible without the bankers, the corporations, the landlords who are behind us, the real estate developers. They're all behind the system. They are the system. And so I think we've come out ahead for Peace and Freedom Party in California and for the Party for Socialism in the US. And that'll be the end of my presentation. I hope I wasn't too long. Sorry.
Thank you, Gloria. That was a very good presentation, and actually not long at all. So I will turn it over to Jean for any announcements, and then after that, we'll get into a robust question and answer. Jean, would you like to make any announcements?
Well, yes, sorry, I was just swallowing my cookies here. So, yeah, well, thank you very much, Gloria. That was excellent talk and helped put things in perspective for us. I just want to remind people that if you agree with us that the work of Karl Marx is crucial for understanding what's going on, I hope you'll let your friends know about us and pass the word on. This program is being recorded. It will be on our YouTube channel, ICSS Marxist, I believe, and probably within a few days. So let your friends know about us. And also, we are a working class organization. We do have an agreement with many foundations that we don't ask them for money and they don't give us money. And that's just the exact relationship we want to have with them. But we do rely on you for financial support because we do have some expenses. And also I want to remind people that next week we'll have Rick Sterling, our man in Syria. He's actually in Rossmore, I think, but he will be speaking on what's the situation in Syria. And so he will hope people will be able to attend that. And we have, I think Richard Fallenbaum, our treasurer, may have a few words to say on that financial situation.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we would appreciate contributions. They're very important. If you look on the chat, the first entry on the chat, you'll see some instructions on how you can contribute, either through PayPal, which is very easy, or through a check through the mail, or even cash through the mail. It supports the work of ICSS and the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library, which we hope will become active again as soon as this pandemic is overcome. So I'll turn it over back to Jean and Roger.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you, Richard.
Can I just say one more?
We'll now have a question and answer period. Jean?
I just want to say one other thing here, that the ICSS is not a tax exempt organization, so you can't claim us on your income tax. The Nebel Proctor Marxist Library, however, is a tax exempt organization. So if you donate directly to them, then, you know, if you put in a couple thousand there, you can claim that on your taxes. So I don't know if Sharon wants to say anything about that, or we just want to make that point when we're approaching the end of the year. So we are not tax exempt, but if you send a donation to the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library directly, and that information is on our webpage. Sharon, did you want to say something on that?
Thank you, Jean. Yes, I just wanted to share that the library has been hurting, along with many other institutions, of course, because a lot of our income, it has been based up to the time of the pandemic on groups renting space from us. And although this organization is continuing to pay that rent, a lot of groups can't afford it and they're not paying us when they're not there. So even though we own the building outright, we still have a lot of expenses of upkeep, I'm sure you can imagine, and just keeping the lights on. So we would appreciate any donation, and it is, we are a 501c3, so you can have a tax deduction. Just send your contributions to the library. I think on our website, there's actually a PayPal link. But either way, we appreciate anything that you can give us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. And now we can go into the question and answer. The rules of that game is that each person has 2 minutes to make either a statement or a question or a combination of both. I think Alan will be timing you and will tell you when your time is over. And then Gloria will have an opportunity to respond. I'll keep a stack, which means indicate that you are interested in participating and asking a question. And the way to do that is to either raise your hand on the screen. If I don't see you, you can raise your hand in the participant list. And I see Zach has a hand up, and let me see if I see anybody else. I can't see all the hands at once. Okay, and let's see. Mark Albertson is on the stack. Eugene Ruyle, not surprising, is on the stack. And let's see who else. Okay, am I missing anybody?
Okay.
Did I hear?
Zach, you have to unmute. Zach.
Oh, I think I'm unmuted.
Okay, now you are.
Okay, so,
Okay, thank you.
so the list would be Zach, Mark, and Eugene in that order. So Zach, please go ahead.
All right. Thanks, everyone. This is my first time attending one of your forums in any way. And it's really cool. I'm definitely going to try to come to more. So thank you all for putting this on. I was a volunteer for Gloria's campaign, and I also volunteered for Jose Cortez's campaign down in the 50th district when he ran against Daryl Issa and Omar Campa-Najjar. I guess my question in general for everyone, but also I'm curious about Gloria's opinion specifically on, obviously the presidential election and other smaller races help bring attention to, the organizations and to our parties. But I'm curious about what people might think would be, a good strategy going forward as, I guess, the left and the working class and labor movement continues to grow. Do we want to be encouraging more people to run in these campaigns, or do we want to kind of pick important races? What should be like our electoral strategy, and how much resources should we, as people trying to organize the working class, how much time should we dedicate to bourgeois electoral politics, and how much resources? Thank you.
So Gloria, why don't you go ahead?
Why don't we go ahead and have 2 or 3?
Okay,
Is that okay?
Then Mark, if you would please unmute yourself.
Yes, good afternoon. Like Zach, I am a first-time attendee, and I will try to make it next week as well. I enjoyed the presentation. But my point here is Gloria brought up how the Revolutionary Communist Party had thrown their lot with Biden, but for obvious reasons. Last time around, 2016, they actually ran a candidate, but last time the Communist Party USA supported Hillary. Are we beginning to see a trend here in our politics? But the fact of the matter is, Trump, yes, is he fascist? Of course he is. However, having said that, America itself has prior to Trump fulfilled that basic definition of a fascist state. If you read the April 1927 Charter of the Worker by Benito Mussolini, where large corporations, large financial institutions run the economy, that the right of the state is primary. The right of the individual is subsumed by the right of the state. And that right now, America fulfills that basic criteria for this. And to conclude with this, I also add, I work on the fringe of the military, industrial, financial, security, congressional complex. That's what it is. Its power is absolutely monolithic. I actually do historical research at a military magazine. And so what I see when I go to work is precisely what America has become. And I would like Gloria's response to this.
Okay, Gloria, do you want to take any more questions or would you like to respond?
One more.
Okay, just one more. So the stack, and let me go through the stack right now, and so everybody knows where you're at. Jean is next, followed by Richard Wright, followed by Susan, followed by Richard Fallenbaum. And those are the people I have currently on the stack. So Jean, please go.
Okay, my question or comment is a little bit different. But one of the things I really appreciate about Gloria and her party is their internationalist perspective, that she's been to most of the communist countries and knows them and supports them. And I just want to relate it. I haven't been to a lot of them, but I was in Cuba back in for the 100th anniversary of the publication of the Communist Manifesto. And one of the North American comrades asked our host the question, well, you say you're a democracy, but you only have one party. How can you call yourself a democracy when you only have one party? And the response was, under Batista, we had 7 political parties and no democracy. Now we have one political democracy. Well, now we have one party and we have democracy. And there's a different conception, clearly, of democracy here than we have in the United States. And I would like to hear Gloria's comments on our mutual Cuban comrades. Thank you.
Okay, so I would like to answer the issue about Zach's question about the elections and what role should socialists play in elections, I'm assuming other than president. To be sure that if the organizations have a force enough in a city and there's room to be running to have a real, I think in particular because it takes so much to run. For example, you know, Jose Cortez ran in San Diego for the 50th district, as you know, Zach, but he was cut off at the legs with the top 2, which is becoming more, I think it can be used more by the bigger parties in order to keep the minor parties from running in the general. And so there was all this big effort to get him to be a candidate. And then after the primary in March, it was over. So you have to wonder about that. There have been successful leftist campaigns, a few that are growing, and I think the interest will increase. I don't think that that's going to be the way to the urgent change that's needed, by hoping that by an incremental increase in the number of local or state or even national candidates that can change. I don't think there's really time for that, because then you win and you can be defeated if you have a progressive program and don't become subsumed by pragmatism and opportunism. You have the case of Cynthia McKinney, who took a strong stand for Palestine after she won a congressional seat in Georgia, and then she got smashed. She had her principles, but this is what happens to people. You know, right now they're really putting a hammer down on AOC in Congress, like blaming her and others. So I think that the struggle of the people is going to have far more effect in these coming months, days, weeks. It's very urgent. I don't think we should I think we should see the COVID crisis as potentially becoming very far more serious, and not just in the numbers, although it's growing exponentially at this point. It's the economic collapse It's what's going to happen with people losing their homes, the evictions, the foreclosures. And I think that has far more potential for us to make change, is to organize people and to see our own power as the working class. There's a lot to do on the ground. When I was on this campaign, by the way, going to all these states, we found a lot of struggles that we encouraged and see could have a real effect in people becoming mobilized and breaking out of, well, I'll wait for 2 more years or 4 more years for an election. And by the way, a lot of the people we met, they didn't plan to vote. They didn't plan to have any role because they're so poor, Black, Latino especially, but people, ex-prisoners, they just maybe were serving, but they didn't see any role in anything. And on the other hand, we went to Birmingham, Alabama, Columbia, South Carolina, Houston, Texas, New Orleans, and in particular, the first 3 cities we mentioned, we got the young people there to start to talk about and organize a campaign against water shutoffs, that there are thousands of people being shut off now in a time when you need water in your home, and especially in this pandemic. That is something that the whole population can understand. Even people who don't have a problem economic, that you need water to live. So I really think we need to get back to those kind of struggles that can help empower people and move them to a higher level. The struggle for unions, there's union organizing going on, including in Amazon and other big corporations where people are seeing that their poverty, low income and insecurity comes from the super exploitation of workers in this country, more visible than ever. So, I think it's fine for people to run locally, but sometimes the effort can be better placed elsewhere. In the comment who spoke, the second person who spoke about seeing, I think fascism and the extremely powerful state apparatus that we're all too familiar with, and seeing more of it applied now to the protesters and the laws that are being applied against demonstrations on Black Lives Matter, but also the military power of the US, to be sure. And that's why we say, as Marxists, Leninists, that to be able to combat and overcome this highly centralized, organized, militarized, economically powerful system in the United States, you have to have organization. The working class needs organization. And it may seem so far off, but you never know when a revolutionary crisis will develop. Is this the beginning of one? Is this a time in which soon, or maybe later, people will say, we can't take anymore? And what could end up being instead a greater pauperization and hopelessness among the people, with leadership, with organization, with grassroots, all the coalition of forces, and including communists, can we instead inspire people to fight against the enemy, the system, the government, which represents the system? And I think I don't see fascism on the horizon. We didn't see the hopeless situation if Trump were to win by giving up our politics and then surrendering to the bourgeois election. We didn't see that because we see the potential for struggle. And I think the outbreak of Black Lives Matter 2, part 2, after Mike Brown and the struggles after in those ensuing 6 years, that the struggle after George Floyd's murder, his assassination, is unprecedented. Nobody could expect that it would reach that level. That not only shook the foundations of white supremacy, that tore down statues, that forced governments to take down statues, to rename, hopefully military bases in order to just get rid of this white supremacist symbolism, but also shows that people have the power. There's a lot to go. There's a much further to go on this movement, but it did more than the prime necessity of fighting racism and police brutality. I think it also got millions of people of all nationalities in the US to see that There's something in this movement that means progress for everybody. It's shaking the system in one way or another. That's also bringing up the issues of economy and poverty. And of course, it has to be broadened onto the larger questions of the right to housing, the right to healthcare. So I don't see the reason to be desperate. I do see the urgency of the need for socialism, and that's what our party believes. There's an urgency to raise socialist ideas. I want to give you an example. I'm sorry for this lengthy answer. I think more than anybody, I was able to see a lot of the comments engage with a lot of people who were voting for Trump, or people who necessarily, they didn't like him either, but they didn't see an answer in Biden. And I think that the bourgeois politicians, not just Republicans, but Democrats as well, but especially the Republicans now in recent years, they've captured much of the working class by this false notion that if you have any improvement in social services, any improvement where the government provides, that it means taxes on the working class. And I kept hearing that comment over and over by people, that when we raise things like healthcare, that's what Sanders was attacked on, was when you talk about the issue of healthcare or, other social services, people would go, no, that will raise our taxes. And of course, the politicians may say no taxes, but they mean no taxes on the rich, cut taxes on the rich. And yet it captivates the working class. I was in, and I think by the socialist providing a socialist answer, which is the only answer to this crisis, that it can win people over to the idea of struggle against a system. One example of many was we went to a Walmart in Columbia, South Carolina, and what we would do is we would go in and approach hundreds of people, workers and shoppers in Walmarts, because they would call the police on us in the parking lot. And we'd walk in with our palm cards, these great 10-point palm cards, and we would leaflet people quietly in the aisle. And I approached them, 70-year-old Walmart worker, a white woman. And I said, ma'am, I'm a socialist running for president. You don't have to vote for Biden or Trump. We're socialists, and this is our program. And she goes, in a nice way, she said, no, we can't have socialism. That means more taxes. And I said, ma'am, under socialism, you wouldn't pay any taxes. You wouldn't pay property tax. You wouldn't pay sales tax. You wouldn't pay a tax for parking tickets that we get all the time, and all these other hidden taxes. And where would the money come from for healthcare, education? It would come from these trillionaire companies like Amazon that got billions in the pandemic, hundreds of billions, and didn't pay anything in taxes last year because they have the power. And we're calling for a system where we who do the work run things, and that everything we produce is shared. And at the end of this, she said, I really like the way you talk. I'm going to look you up. Where can I find? And I showed her on the card. She goes, I'm going to look you up. And I just want to say that because we were in Fresno, California, which, by the way, is #2 in the country for extreme poverty, levels of extreme poverty. And we went to a park where we met people. We said, come meet the candidate in the Central Park downtown, and who had also come because it was publicized in the polls in the streets, was 4 older, obviously poor white people in wheelchairs. And they had come along with a Trump supporter who was filming us. But these 4 people were there on the edge watching us and hoping for some sort of a argument with us. And I approached them and I went to talk to them. What ended up being was a meeting, a discussion of about 20 minutes where they were trying to argue me down about taxes. And I thundered back about the billionaires. And you could see the unity among them was breaking apart because one would say, well, that's their wealth. And the other was, well, that's too much, and maybe that's not right. Yeah, I agree with her. And finally, at the end, the woman said, well, I have to say something. She goes, this isn't a race war. It's a class war. And you in the middle class. And I said, no, ma'am, I'm not in the middle class. I'm a low income retired woman who's about to lose my pension after 36 years of contributing. I said, we're like you. We're the working class, and we're all on the same side. And I'll tell you, I think we had a big effect on them. And they were very friendly when we left. So I think the battle is to win over people who've been captured by false consciousness of decades, including racism. Although I don't think most people who voted for Trump are racist. I really don't. And I think a lot of that racism is by seeing over and over and over all these accusations that don't get countered by the Democrats, by the other side of the bourgeoisie. In fact, have contributed to it with mass incarceration, with police, with supporting police. So that I think my message is we got to keep fighting. We got to keep organizing.
Okay, thank you, Gloria. So now let's get to some of the next questions. On the stack is Richard Wright, followed by Susan, followed by Richard Fallenbaum, followed by Sharon Rose, and then Norma. So Richard Wright, please unmute yourself.
I hope, yes, it looks like I've done that. I've got to say, I kind of forgot what I was going to ask after all that. But I noticed there was somebody that talked earlier, and they focused on Trump. And one of the things from the start that I've always held is that all that Trump really did was liberate the Republicans in particular, and to a lesser extent the Democrats, from the restraint of racism and classism, and he basically said, hey, it's okay to be an asshole, and they took it, and they as a class, they in particular the Republicans, joined arms and held firm, and they will continue to do that for a large measure in this next session. Okay, my question is that for those of us in the other 35, I think, states that don't know what the Party for Socialism and I forget what she
Liberation.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea what that is. I don't think that she was on the ballot here, or that party was on the ballot. And so I guess I'm wondering is, one, what is the PSL, and two, we need to be getting into where do the trade unions fit in all this, because the trade unions have increasingly gone towards the center. And they've become basically a participant in the Democratic Party as the vanguard party, if you will. And we need to get beyond that. And so my question is, how do we get the trade unions off of their centrist position? And with that, I'll hang up. Thank you.
Okay. And I take it, Gloria, you'd like to do a few more questions before you respond to that?
Let's have another one. Yeah, I'll get back to that.
So, Susan, if you could please.
Hello.
Oh, that's Michael K.
Michael, not Susan. I changed my name. There's two people on this login. Gloria, thank you for holding up the red flag during the election. That's a very important contribution. However, there are many other arenas of struggle, and I wanted to mention one and get your thoughts. Currently, there's a big struggle within the Democratic Party between their centrist wing, led by Biden, Pelosi, and Clyburn, and their progressive wing, led by Pramila Jayapal of the Progressive Caucus, AOC, and the Squad. The Squad, some of them say they are socialists. The centrist will be strengthened by the Lincoln Project Never Trumpers, who were Republicans, but who have now been welcomed by some of the centrists into the Democratic Party. This is an arena where 75 million people just participated. How can the fact that the Democratic Party is a bourgeois party mean that leftists should not play a role there? Why is participating in this struggle a surrender? What role should leftists play in this struggle that I just mentioned? That struggle will influence not a few thousand people, but millions of people. And that's my question to Gloria and to everyone in this meeting. Thank you.
Okay, Gloria, you got
Yeah.
trade unions, the Democratic Party, what is PSL, and the role of the struggle within the Democratic Party.
The first person was named Richard, was it?
Richard Wright from Texas.
Oh, Richard, yes. Richard, yes, we were not on the ballot in Texas, but we were a write-in, an official write-in, and 12 other states as well. It was really a lot of work to get a write-in in Texas, but we do have a growing number of people in Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, and people in other cities like Austin, to a smaller degree, but certainly where I campaigned actively this time was Houston. And I was really encouraged by how many young people have joined just in this year alone. And it was exciting because at the end of our rally, we all went out, several dozen went out into the neighborhoods to talk to people. And because they're so new, they came back thrilled by this exercise of talking to people about socialism door to door. And they want to do a lot more of it. But anyway, the PSL was formed in 2004, June 2004. And we are now in dozens of cities. Half the states that we're on, we were not, had no presence before. We're in every region of the country, from Oregon and Washington all the way to New York, New Jersey, Vermont, down to Florida. We were able to be on the ballot this time in Florida through a lawsuit. We even achieved status in DC. But anyway, we're all over the country and have been very, very active in the Black Lives Matter. We have many people involved in unions. Your question about the issue of the trade unions, where are they in this? I have been union official. I've been president of my union for 10 years, and then I'm now vice president of my local, which is representing the journalists primarily and printing plants in the Bay Area, the San Francisco Chronicle. And you know, we know what the role of the trade unions is in the elections. They pour hundreds of millions of dollars to support Democrats and often find themselves disillusioned. I remember one of the things I participated in, not as supporting the Democrats, but the Employee Free Choice Act, which was a plan to radicalize the right to a union and a contract that was promulgated by the AFL-CIO. And Obama and Clinton promised wholeheartedly that they would back it. And of course, Obama, when he was elected, immediately said there's no reason for it. But this idea that they keep getting disappointed and saying next time, we're going to be more independent. We're not going to let them take advantage of us. I think it's starting to break up. I think the unions, and I've said this before, you know, I go to my union conventions. I've been a delegate. I've been fortunate to be a delegate to the CWA. And in 2008, after that Employee Free Choice Act, Larry Cohen was the initiator of it. He was the president of our international. And I spoke to him. I said, Larry, why don't we this fall, election year, organize a mass demonstration of hundreds of thousands of union workers to demand that Congress pass this act, you know, and whoever becomes president signs it. And after tens of millions of dollars being spent, he goes, oh no, we don't have money for that. And I thought, okay, well, you're going to continue along the same line. But then came Occupy, and unions started to play a more active role. The unions ignored the immigration struggle in 2006. They didn't consider the undocumented as a critical part of the working class. Now they do. And now the unions are up against the wall. The court cases, Janus case, And now private companies may be able to weaken the right of unions, the right to work legislation, all these things coming up. The unions are being put up against a wall. And I've always said, and I think it's necessary for the unions really to take a more independent stance from just simply quieting after the election. What stance will they take? Well, we march here in San Francisco yesterday, led by the unions, that the message was, we got to keep fighting. We got to fight. We want healthcare now. We want rights for immigrants. We want, no evictions, no cancellation, cancel the rents, all these kind of things that the left has been promoting. And I think there's a change. I think it'll probably fall into the same routine if we have to back Biden. There'll be a struggle within the Democratic Party to be sure. I think the Democrats will overcome because they represent capital, because they represent imperialism. I think they will definitely overcome. Don't forget, big oil, the war manufacturers, the banks, which are the foundation of all this system. They have this big power. And so until there's an independent stance of fight back, I think it'll be, obviously a struggle that continues. But I say this, if the unions have to look beyond just looking to their members as their force, they have to be seen by the workers who are not organized, the whole working class, as leaders in the struggle for them. And they don't do that yet. They don't speak to the rights of all workers. They do in a way, but not really. And that's where I think things are at. I think there's hope in the unions. I believe in the unions. I think there'll be a point at which they say we can't continue along the same way. I don't know if anybody else wants to comment on that last question about the role within the Democratic Party, and I mean, I'm assuming that's what you mean, the struggle inside the Democratic Party. Maybe we should have more discussion.
Yes, thank you. Okay, our next question is from Richard Fallenbaum. And you have to unmute.
Okay. I very much appreciate the presentation and the role that PSL played in the election. But one of the conclusions that Gloria came to was that really the election was, I think, was a blowout victory for imperialism. The two imperialist parties dominated the election. And in my view, one of the important factors that the left especially doesn't recognize was the importance of the demonization of Trump. That was an important factor, particularly among the more conscious sections of the working class. The working class bought into it. And I think as advanced Marxists, we need to have an all-round view of Trump. I mean, obviously the negative aspects of him, his politics are manifest, but we tend to ignore the positive aspects that were more salient to a lot of people. His opposition to finance capital, his opposition to endless wars, his attempt to withdraw the troops from Syria, from Afghanistan, to maintain and strengthen normal relations with the Russian Federation, and even in his early days, his position on China was not ideological. It was only when Pompeo and that group took over that it took on a political aspect. And I think it was a bad mistake because a lot of it was hard to take seriously much of the left campaigning, not only in the pro-democratic, but in the independent. Now, on the question of the working within the Democratic Party, I think I think it's perfectly valid to work in the Democratic Party. But the first thing we have to do is get over the idea of right, center, left. Biden is not center. Biden is imperialist. Biden is the candidate of finance capital. He's the enemy of workers. And it's interesting that even everybody who works in the Democratic Party, except those who are very strong, and I haven't seen any, get when they get up to the political level, get absorbed into it. It's interesting that even AOC and the squad get absorbed into the Democratic Party, into the pro-imperialist Democratic Party. The whole Democratic Party in Congress voted for war with Russia. No question about it. They support U.S. foreign policy without exception. It's amazing to me. So we have to deal with that. Thank you.
I think your time is up. Thank you, Richard. I've got a few comments in the chat, Gloria, but answering one question at a time so that it feels a bit more interactive. So would you mind responding to Richard?
I agree very much with what Richard said about what we see as a preference by the foreign policy establishment for Biden over Trump. Trump was too unstable. Goes to meet with Kim Jong-un. That enraged John Bolton, who was at that time, in his staff. It enraged the Pentagon when he said he was going to remove troops from Syria. That enraged the Democratic Party leadership. Biden made it very clear that he intends to continue the aggression against China. The Democrats have been sponsors of many pieces of legislation against China, the Russia bashing, and so on and so forth. I think that the generals who signed on, the ex-generals, the foreign policy experts who signed on against Trump, shows that they wanted to get rid of him. I think why he was able to stay in for these 4 years to wreak havoc was because of this massive handover of wealth to the corporations and the banks. And yet he also, he wasn't an anti-imperialist because he carried out the sanctions against China, threats to Cuba, severely tightening the blockade and passing many measures against Cuba. His swearing that Venezuela and Cuba would no longer exist as socialist countries, Nicaragua, all of that. But the Democrats played a part too under Obama, more slickly. People have no idea what a critical role Obama played and what he promised in overturning or trying to overturn the leftist current in Latin America. Of course, now we see that the plan against Bolivia didn't succeed with the election of Arce in Bolivia, which was a really big victory, and also the new constitution of Chile. But I think we're seeing so much of this narrative on the TV about what a great unifier Biden is, and a lot of people are falling into that. We've got to keep clear about the danger of this system and not to fall for any more imperialist lies, to be consistent in the streets against any U.S. adventure, and to fight what is already underway, like the aggression against Venezuela. It was really ridiculous to see these commentators talk about, after suffering so much personal hardship, now he's finally had a victory, and personalizing this thing like, let's make him a human now. Let's make him a person you can love. But of course, that's their narrative on TV. And yet it's going to be 3 months till Biden comes in. He's going to, I think, make people hopeful about the issue of fighting the pandemic. But is he going to take on the banks to demand income for people? Are they going to take on the banks on the issue of the right of people not to be evicted in mass by the tens of millions? Or healthcare, which he opposes, who opposes a national healthcare plan. So yes, in essence, what the Democrats are going to do by their play it safe, bipartisanship, and refusing to take on a fight for the working class, because that's not their objective, is that, like what happened with Obama over the first 2 years, I don't think they're going to have the majority of the Senate. And they believe to have the majority in the Senate in these two runoffs is that they're going to have to really squash the left in the Democratic Party and play it real safe in an uninspiring way. And then, depending on the outcome of that, they'll always have the excuse why they couldn't do anything in the first 2 years. They have the power of the executive action, but what will they do, in fact, with that? They could conceivably inspire people. And perhaps there could be enough pressure only if the working class, and only if the unions, and only if the organized groups, the national organizations, for the most part, many NGOs, only if they see that they have to step up the struggle and stop falling into the trap of the Democratic Party as leadership. So,
Okay, thank you.
anyway.
So the next person on the stack is Sharon, followed by Norma, followed by Richard. So Sharon, would you like to speak?
Thank you. I just wanted to make a few quick points. Thank you, Gloria. This is very thought-provoking. So my first point is that I believe that communists need to be everywhere. I think Richard Fallenbaum already said that. So I'm a member of two local Democratic clubs, and I don't apologize for that, because I think it's really important to split and figure out how to build the left within the Democratic Party and know what they're doing, hear what they're doing, et cetera. Also, I think that communists need to run independent socialist candidates. And I'm a supporter I'm close to the Communist Party, but I've always been extremely critical. For a very long time, I've been critical, tried to raise the fact that the Communist Party should, in my opinion, be running independent candidates everywhere. And that fact that they don't is really preventing them from growing, in my opinion. So the PSL is growing because you do that, and that's a good thing. I think on Trump, I think that we have only begun to scratch the surface of understanding the damage that his administration has done. So they have really set back they've put in rules about union organizing that have represented a setback to the union movement in many ways. Just the other day, they moved to decertify the union of immigration attorneys, or immigration judges, administrative judges. I didn't know that the employer can just automatically or by fiat decertify a union, but at least according to the story in the New York Times, that's what they are trying to do, and which is a really bad thing, because those people have been struggling for independence and not just be rubber stamps for the horrible stay in Mexico program. There's many other examples, environment, et cetera, that it's going to be hard to undo. And then the third thing I want to say is that I don't agree that all politics is local, but some is. And there's a dialectic between local and national politics. I've been working very hard around education in Oakland, and we just had an enormous victory. 3 out of the 4 progressive candidates for school board in Oakland won against $1 million of billionaire money. We didn't think we were going to win, but we did. And what we mean by progressive is against the privatization of schools, of education across the country, which, by the way, was definitely fostered and furthered by Obama's education department, and only got worse under Trump. So Oakland has been a target of a flashpoint around a national struggle against privatization and charterization of schools. And now that we have this victory, we're planning to take leadership in the national arena around that very issue. So not all politics is local, but some of it is very important. Thank you.
So, Gloria?
Your comment, I think this too. There's a lot of important local politics. I think San Francisco, for example, being able to have more of the progressive supervisors to encounter the mayor, for example. There's a lot of importance in it. And I think that a lot of more progressive people see themselves having possibilities in running in elections. I don't discount that at all. We wouldn't. I respect much that you are carrying on your Democratic Party work, Democratic clubs and so on. We don't do that in the PSL, Jen. We don't do that.
My turn.
Okay. And Alan, by the way, is timing people. And so he'll give that symbol
Okay.
when time is up. So take a look at Alan's time. But the next speaker, next questioner is Norma.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Gloria, I don't know how everybody else is doing, of course, but I am missing more than half of what you're saying because of your sound. I don't know that you could do anything about it, but I needed to register that. The sound gets twisted. Mehmet some time ago commented to me that, which is just lovely, I forever remember it. He said that in Venezuela, they made struggle from the top and from the bottom, meaning they elected people into office who, as you know, the communist principles were growing with Hugo Chavez, who's also becoming more and more committed to those ideas. And they were growing in society, and they were electing more and more people to office who could facilitate what the grassroots wanted done, had been campaigning for. I think that's a very important piece of information for us to know. We know that the use of the electoral behavior is a way to communicate, as you've done so well and so appreciated during this past election and previous elections. That's two things. I look forward to the time when we have preached enough to the point where people are beginning to get that the relation of labor is to capital, is not to production that we need and feel needs to be done, but to profit by our owners. That owners is with a capital O. I'm waiting for people to perceive the pain that they live with. People, my latest example is people have to go in and wake up their child that is in the midst of deep sleep at an early hour to go run and go to school. I've run, you might know, a campaign talking about the place of school in this kind of society, and actually any kind of society. School is age segregation.
Norma, the 2 minutes are over, so if you could wrap up, please.
2 minutes.
Yes.
I was hoping that there would be 3. Maybe that's enough. Anyway, I like the idea of running for office to support our socialist positions.
Thank you. Any comments? Gloria, go on.
Thank you so much, Norma, for your comments. I think it's very true what you're saying. I think in particular, you're talking about the relationship of labor to capital. One of my favorite themes in the campaign was to talk to people, to break down to audiences workers that everything we consume, use, everything that's produced is made by the labor of literally hundreds of thousands in social, coordinated, collective action, production, and that the problem with everything that's produced is it's owned by a tiny minority, and that they are the real dictatorship. They make the decisions whether we live or die, whether the plant we work in gets shut down, and the fact that they're paying less and less taxes, and that they want it all, that they won't be satisfied with paying 11% tax as they did last year average, but that they want it all. It really points out to people like, yeah, without the ownership, things would still run and it would be more ecological. We could save the planet. We could run things instead of having cars all over the place and moving on to electric cars. It's the answer, or stop driving cars, mass transit. Anyway, yeah, I appreciate your comment.
Thank you. And then Richard, please unmute yourself. I think Richard, unmute. Does someone need to unmute Richard?
He's unmuted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Thank you.
Okay, so, I've been on and off the call because I did an interview with Islamic, or the Iranian Islamic Republic radio. And, what's on their mind is what's on the mind of most people in the world right now is what's going to happen. What's going to happen with Trump? Is Trump going to accept the change or not? That's a real question, I think, in a lot of the world. And we probably not want to get too far ahead of ourselves in regard to that. Someone I think on this list has been using the Julius Nyerere quote, which is, the United States also has a one-party system, but with typical extravagance, they have two of them, which is very true. That's the reality. And the type of system we have, I think it's important to look at the system because I think sometimes even, and I would say this about myself, we don't realize how incredibly undemocratic it is. The fact that it's not a parliamentary system, the fact that this is a constitutional system created not before there were cell phones, but before there were telephones, before there were motorized vehicles. It was, it's so ancient and so undemocratic and deliberately undemocratic. And when I heard some people during this campaign, like I think it was Robert Wright saying, we're facing a constitutional crisis. So I went, yeah, we need a constitutional crisis. We need something that breaks through what exists now, because what exists now prevents the emergence of, 110 years ago, there were 15 members of Congress who were socialist or labor, and most of them socialist. Now there are none, really. I mean, the ones who are, I guess we can say there's a few democratic socialists, but they're not nearly as radical as what the socialists, even that were considered moderates, that they were. And the way the system is constructed, it doesn't allow for parliamentary representation. And because it doesn't allow for parliamentary representation for smaller parties, it prevents them from ever emerging. There needs to be a constitutional crisis. There needs to be a big crisis that breaks through this. And this representative, what's her name, Abigail Spanberger from Virginia, who gave her profanity-laced presentation on the national conference call about never mention the word socialism again in regard to the Democratic Party. Well, what she's saying is the socialists should get out, and they should get out. There needs to be a new party. The PSL has been growing a lot of young people, but we know we're not where we need to be. There needs to be a mass workers' party that has a revolutionary orientation in the United States. And the possibility for that very much exists today. It really exists today. And we can see from our own experience, millions of people, as Gloria mentioned, were drawn into socialist politics by the Sanders campaign, particularly in 2015 and 16. And they weren't drawn in because of socialism. They didn't know what socialism was. 99.9% of them, they were drawn in by Medicare for all, forgive student debt and those things. But then they stumbled on this word, socialism, and then they started looking for it. And this is what we hear hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times over. Then I started reading Marx and Lenin and Engels and to find out that what I really am, I am a real socialist. I'm not a social democrat. And so, you know, that's why he had to be knocked out also, because if he had become the nominee, even with the mildest form of socialism, and it's not really socialism, but social democracy, but using the term, that was too dangerous for the system. And the Republicans, the Democrats united with the Republicans, as Gloria said, but united among themselves to crush the Sanders movement. But in a certain way, the horse was already out of the barn. What we need to do is find a way to build a mass socialist party.
I'm going to go to Mark Albertson now, and then have Gloria respond to both questions.
Yeah, Gloria, I have another question for you. Engels wrote one time that as you're winding down the 19th century at this point, that, you know, with the change in politics that are coming along, you're beginning to see the growth of socialism, progressivism, so on and so forth, as industrialization really begins to take hold here. It's already taken hold in Europe, but it's snowballing in the 19th century in the United States. Of course, that's because the North won the Civil War, what we call the Civil War. But by the mid 1890s, America is the world's ranking industrial power. We'd already displaced the British. But Engels noted that socialism was for the bourgeois class and communism was for the working class. Would you care to try to decipher that?
I'm off video, by the way, Richard, because Roger, because I think if my voice is cutting out, then I thought it might take up less bandwidth. And well, for us, we're socialists and we're communists. We talk publicly more popularly as socialists, and people will ask, well, what's the difference? Well, the difference is in the stage of where we're at. We're fighting for socialism, but the ultimate objective is communism. And I don't know about that quote that you were talking about just now, but I think that sometimes people say, well, this is really socialism for the corporations. No, you either have a system where all the wealth and the wealth producing means of production are owned in common to benefit all, and from there comes the political system. And the whole question, by the way, going back to one of the first questions about a political party, whether you have multiple parties or one party, Cuba's view, I mean, they'll say this, you know, this is their explanation for a sole party, is that they say that was the concept of their hero of the nation, Jose Marti, in forming the Cuban Revolutionary Party to fight the Spanish colonizers, and then later, of course, facing up to the US. But the Communist Party of Cuba is simply the guiding force of the socialist system and does not play a role, although it sounds absurd to say, they do not play a role in the elections, that the elections truly are grassroots based, where people nominate in their neighborhoods to represent in the municipal assembly. And as you move up the ladder in the National Assembly, half of them are people directly elected from the base, and the other half is to assure representation among all the mass organizations of the unions, of the farmers, of the youth, of the young communists, of the Women's Federation, and the other mass organizations. And it's based on a parliamentary system in which the Council of State, the Council of Ministries, and the President, the executive body, is elected by the National Assembly. They've made some changes and they revised their constitution last year, but in essence, it is a system where, with being a worker state, that they have eliminated, in essence, the capitalists. They did that in the early years and have brought back some limited economic measures. But in essence, the political party of the communists is not in order to engage in fighting for offices. It's as a guiding force. I think that's an important concept in which, as a result, with the elections, they're free. You don't have people spending billions to vie for their office and their power. It's completely different from capitalism. And I agree with Richard Becker's comment about the electoral system of the United States and how it developed and its absolute control to keep any workers' representation inside the government, with minor exceptions, and the role that we have to play in the need for a workers' party, a mass labor party, and so on. So that's my answer to that. Sorry for taking too long.
Thank you,
And am I heard a little better, Roger?
much better. Thank you. We should have. I should have suggested that earlier, and I'm self-critical about that. All right, next person. I think no. Did you put your hand up again? You're muted.
Right. I did, because I was in the middle of running down a list. Yeah, somebody mentioned transportation. What I'm saying is, I urge us to let other people bring forth the ideas of their discomfort with their life. People have to hate the things that are the function of containment, of containing us. And I say one of those is school. School makes us very unhappy and uncomfortable. You can read my stuff, or you can write me a note and I'll send it to you. I was thinking about transportation. People are being driven insane by the long trips, or by being cut off entirely from being able, and I know this is a different time, but if there's ever another time, given the transmogrification of the virus, it's changing anyway. It's going to be with us forever, something. But transportation, we need to control transportation. We need to have little vehicles running short distances all the time, always outside the door practically, and always available. We need to think of doing work that feels good to do. We could at least put that in people's, let that be in people's minds. It's very hard to figure out. And one of the main objectives is to get over the working conditions in capitalism, which are terribly oppressive and insulting and humiliating, and almost unmanageable. Oh yes, we have to go to that 8-hour day. Well, that's the point. We don't. We could work a few hours a week and still maintain the things that we need and want done. I'm advocating for us to be able to recognize together, say it together, this is not a comfortable life. We don't like it, and we don't need to live it this way. So to develop a conversation with other people, to be able to say it together, and then to identify alternatives if possible. It's very difficult. They say it's hard, it's impossible to imagine it's more possible to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. Thank you.
Gloria, would you like to respond, or go on to Jean? Let's go on to Jean.
Yeah, thank you. And I just wanted to clarify that quote from Engels that Mark mentioned. Engels, as you know, is one of my favorite writers. And that particular quote, I believe, is in the 1988 preface to the Communist Manifesto. And there, Engels explains why it's the Communist Manifesto and not the Socialist Manifesto, because in 1848, when it was written, socialism was respectable. It was a bourgeois concept. And communism was anything but respectable. It was a working class concept. So that was why they chose the Communist Manifesto rather than the Socialist Manifesto. But then these words change over time. So later, Engels wrote Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, and he used scientific socialism. And again, words had changed. And then later on, Marx had never distinguished between the lower and higher phase of communism. These were both phases of communism. But it was Lenin that started calling the lower phase socialism and the higher phase communism, which I had a lot of trouble with for a long time. And then I realized it's just my own particular idiosyncrasy. And on the one hand, we had Lenin saying something. On the other hand, we had Eugene Ruyle saying something. So there's no question about who to choose. But I just want to clarify some of those terminological distinctions, which were made. I'm not sure they're all that important, but sometimes they get in the way of understanding what's going on. So I just wanted to alert people to that and read Engels more thoroughly. That's all.
Very, very good, Gene.
Thank
Let's
you.
go on to Raj and then let Gloria respond.
Thank you, Roger. My question is related to the tension in the world that we can all see developing between United States and its allies, which are the traditional old capitalist countries, mature imperialist countries, as against rising power of China with a few other countries, most important of which is Russia, kind of not aligned, but in that camp. So when I look back at Lenin's writing on imperialism, his conflict with Kautsky was Kautsky believed that there could be a single pole of capital. And Lenin vehemently argued against that. And since the fall of the Soviet Union, it seems like after the Second World War, the United States emerged as the undisputed pole of capital. And I think the Second World War cut back on this imperial stage of capital. In other words, a sufficient amount of capital was destroyed that now capitalism could be productive again, productive in the sense of make profit, sufficient rate of profit. So, but I think that stage came to an end because new production centers developed, capital again enlarged, and I think the second coming of the imperialist stage in the economic sense happened around the mid-70s. And since that time, there is this crisis. Now, China has emerged. To resolve that crisis, investment was made in China. Now the crisis is that China is the other pole. Now, whether it's run by a Communist Party, so it's not the same thing as a Western imperialist power, but it is another pole of capital. And workers in the United States don't see, well, there may be many reasons why they don't see socialism as the answer in the past. But one of the things is that they've lost their jobs to China. So I wonder how you see it in this second pole competition that's going on, and how do the workers, Gloria, in your travels and meeting with the worker, did anybody bring that up and your own answers to that? I'd like to know.
Thank you. So Gloria, and then Alan is next on the stack.
Thank you, Roger. Very, very interesting question. There's so much to unpack there. And I would say that before the pandemic, we have to remind ourselves that a recession was already underway and developing to the point that in late February, not really understanding the full effect in the ruling class that this pandemic would take, and that it would be, it could be years that it lasts, and it's deepening now. So it has another effect of deepening the crisis. But in late February, the Federal Reserve governors of all the 12 banks met, and it's reported in the Times where they were urging that because of the economic crisis, remember oil was collapsing in terms of the price per barrel and became negative as the pandemic started. But they met and they demanded, they said, we cannot wait the months that it took to get the rescue for the banks in the 2008-2009 crisis. They said that took too long and we have to speed up. We need to have emergency legislation in Congress so that we can have instant relief for the recession. And instead, what happened was the CARES Act, which enabled that, exactly what they were demanding, an instant rush of trillions of dollars into the system. And that's where US capital is at. That in partly because of the competition with China, and despite its threats against China, China's far too powerful to be succumbing, although it was willing to engage in trade talks and negotiations, is far too powerful to succumb to US military threats and further economic threats of sanctions and replied on its own. I think the world situation, going, I think, beyond all your question, Raj, because your comments were also an answer to the question, is that I think we're fortunate with even with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the damage that it engendered in the world, with the US carrying on more aggressive stance in the Middle East, destroying Iraq, bombing Iraq, then 12 years of sanctions in which the Soviet Union would have been a counterpart, that now we see the Russia, China, an alignment of forces in the world that is helping stave off what certainly would have been the complete destruction of Syria by the US, except Russia stepped in, and that that Venezuela is being rescued to a great degree, being given a hand in surviving this crisis of the severe sanctions. I mean, the power is not just military. The US has this unique financial power to use the banks to cut Cuba off from being able to even have transactions with the world, and the billions of dollars in fines that under Obama were imposed on US and international banks, and the power of the US to apply sanctions on the ships that were delivering oil to Venezuela, the capturing of Iranian ships going to Venezuela and selling the oil. I mean, these are acts of war. The cutting off of the agreement between Cuba and Venezuela is an act of war. And what Russia is doing is helping bolster Venezuela against possible military attack. I think the US is trying another way to undo Venezuela by the Guaido scheme, the arming of paramilitaries that are peppered through the country now, and we could see further action. Nobody in Venezuela, by the way, in the leadership thinks that Biden is going to be a relief for them. We should make it clear. They say it will be just as dangerous for us under Biden, because Biden says, well, we'll go back to the Obama measures with respect to Cuba, but that's a more sophisticated view that Obama had with relationship to Cuba. The objective is the same, overturning socialism, but within, because he said the 50 years or 60 years of blockade didn't work. We have to try another mean. And so that's why Obama says we're not going to lift the blockade until we get certain demands met. The main demand was, they said, for us to have corporations operate in Cuba under foreign investment, is that we must be the direct employers of the Cuban workers. That is a very interesting way of saying we want the Cubans to see us as their boss and not the Cuban government, which is the mediator between foreign investors in the country. Anyway, I'm just going off there, but to say that I think we're lucky in this time to have China, Russia, Iran as a force in the Middle East that can't be, attacked the way they did with Iraq, although it's a great danger still. And that despite the unraveling of some of the South American left and the governments, that we're seeing a a possible resurgence again, because their victory in Bolivia with the coup didn't resolve anything. It just created more repression. The victory of Bolsonaro in Brazil and just created more suffering. A raging coronavirus, so similar to what's happening in the US, and on and on.
Okay,
So I think that's all I want to say.
okay, it's about 12:19. The formal session goes on to about 12:30. We can have that a bit flexible, but we have Alan has taken his hand down. So we have Richard Wright and then Richard Becker. And then Gloria, if you wanted to make a final summary statement, we can do that as well. So Richard Wright, why don't you take the floor, please?
I sort of wanted to address Raj's point, and that is that I think it's increasingly, in fact, it's been happening now for what, 10 years, I think, 20 years. Is that there's a shift from a unipolar or bipolar world model to a very multipolar. And I think that I mean, I think we're seeing, for one, in China, and I think Eugene can probably talk to this point better than I can. I'm surprised Gary hasn't said something. But I think that, like in China, they've been planning for roughly the last 10 to 15 years to make their trade less and less dependent on between the United States and themselves, and more toward a multipolar trade route. Secondly, you know, we've seen one of the things we've seen is in reaction to these crippling economic strikes by the United States, we've increasingly seen gold being sent away from New York and being taken up by various host countries. Russia, I believe China's in there now. I think Venezuela wants to get there. If I forget the rest of them, but in any case, you've been seeing a shift of gold reserves being taken out of New York, where they can be held hostage, and being moved to their host countries. So that's another indication of the economic model that we used to live by, I think, is disintegrating. And it's also true, I think, that the European model, for example, Germany, I think, was taking umbrage with the United States is trying to, Germany wants to deal with Russia as far as oil goes. So, so as far as the United States being a leader in all this stuff, I think we now have to change the way we look at things in terms of a multiplicity of centers. And with that, I'll pass it on to anybody else.
Gloria, do you want to respond to that?
No, I think it's really good if others want to just comment and have more of a discussion, you know.
Sure,
I think
let's go on to Richard.
I like that comment.
Richard, you need to unmute yourself.
Oh yeah, okay. So I, just wanted to recommend if people want to get a quick look at the foreign policy team coming in with Biden, it was on between 3 and 4 yesterday. I was in the car, it was around that time, but it was an interview with someone named Admiral Stavridis. I think that's how you say his name. He's the former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. And he spoke, very favorably, very happy about the Biden election. He talked about, he said, my beloved NATO. How you can love a military alliance is another, question. But he talked about who the foreign policy team is. And first name, Michelle Flournoy. Second name, Susan Rice. Tony Blinken. Kurt Campbell. These are all the Hillary Clinton neocons. And they really were the neocons. They were all part of something after the PNAC collapsed. after its disgrace, you know, the original neocon. Then the Center for New American Security was created, and Flournoy was the head of it. Hillary Clinton spoke at its opening thing, blah, blah, blah. But the thing is, what you will get from this is that this is the team that represents what I think was being spoken about earlier, where Raj was speaking and Gloria was speaking and others about the group that's the hegemonic group. Michelle Flournoy wrote a big article, and she was hoping to be Secretary of Defense if Hillary Clinton had won. She's hoping the same now. Susan Rice is, I think, hoping to become the National Security Advisor, or Anthony Blinken will be one of those. But that's who this group is. They're the traditional defenders of the empire. And Flournoy wrote this article back in July, and this is the last thing I'll say, is that it was how to stop a new war in Asia. And how to stop it was to build up the faltering US presence in Asia, which already has 60% or 70% of US military power. So that's who the Biden for it. So, you know, we will see what's coming, but I think it's pretty predictable what the foreign policy is going to be.
Thank you. Anybody else want to comment?
Mark has his hand up.
Oh,
Last
okay.
one.
Thank you. Mark, please.
Yeah, I just like to concur with a lot of what Richard just alluded to, because when the comment here is, I mean, you've got Biden now, and he's just Hillary Clinton without a dress.
No, it's quick. Gloria, I don't see any more hands up. And
I've got my hand up.
Who's that?
Rich.
Oh, Rich, please speak.
Okay, so we're getting close to 12:30 here, but I'm hoping the recording keeps going. But I would just like to say my impression of this whole discussion. I have to rate this very, very high. I started to say number one, but I can't think of every discussion we've had after every presentation over the last 9 months or even longer, even when we were in the building. So what I want to say is that this has been a very fruitful back and forth. I want to thank Gloria and Dick's chuckles. I was wondering if you were listening in, Dick, but anyway, I don't know if you came in late, but I'm glad you were there. But anyway, Gloria, so I have to say personally, this is the first time I've heard you speak. I have many friends who have promoted not just your personal, the PSL, your campaigns, yours as a candidate, all this, but I've never actually heard you before, and it's my fault. But I just want to say thank you very much for generating this discussion, and for each of the people that put their ideas in, the questions, which might or might have been in agreement. Almost everything you've said, anyone has said that you've didn't have the time to speak to extensively. You said, but I like that. Well, thank you. I mean, the whole thing is just the most that I can remember, the most dynamic discussion that we've had. And I wish they were all like this. And if they were, we'd have a lot more people listening. Anyway, I've said enough, but thank you very much. I have to say that personally, directly. Thank you.
Okay, we just about have enough time for Gloria to do a sum up, some of the final thoughts, particularly about looking forward.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for being on. And thank you again to everyone who made this happen. I really appreciate the invitation and being able to speak. I hope I didn't speak too long. I hope I got close to the answers of answering people's questions. Everyone's comments was well appreciated, questions and comments. And I agree, it was a good roundabout discussion. If people would like to read today, we issued immediately yesterday upon the finalizing of the vote for Biden. The PSL issued a statement, an official statement on the defeat of Donald Trump and what it means, what's really behind this all. on liberationnews.org. And you can see a little bit of our campaign. There's some really nice videos on LaRiva2020.org of the exchanges with some people that we had. I feel extremely privileged to have been around the country. That was only possible with all the comrades who worked so hard on the campaign. I think we've gained a lot. I do think that we have many challenges ahead of us of how independent the movement will be, how it will be able to see that it must chart its own way to not concede on the demands of the right of people to housing, including not just people risking eviction and foreclosure, but those who are in the streets today, people who are going to freeze to death in Minnesota, in Chicago, and all the places where it becomes cold. 960 people, by the way, died in 12 months last year in Los Angeles County being homeless. 960. And this year, that number was achieved in 9 months of the year. And so the record number of homeless dying in the streets in one of the richest cities in the world is going to increase. So these are our challenges, that there are so many people who are off the political grid, off the electoral grid, and we must think of the working class in all its expressions, and including the undocumented, including all those who have no hope of even finding work. They are the working class. I think that we are a great group of people who come under the umbrella of Naval Proctor, and I will be making my donation. Thank you so much. I think it is urgent that we support each other and make sure that we have our offices and our work going. But I want to urge people to again read Liberation News for the update and other coverage. And the struggle continues. It's what we must do.
Thank you very much, Gloria, and thank you for all the work that you've done for the movement. It's now a little bit past 12:30, so our formal session is over. We'll have an open discussion, which will be unmoderated. I do see that some hands are up, but at this point, the moderation will end and the open session will begin. So thank you very much for joining us.
But you might stay on to at least give a sequence of people who are going to speak so that everybody doesn't jump at once.
So
That's
I think
my suggestion.
in terms of speakers would be Gary Hicks would come first, then Yusef, and then Gene. That's not the Gene had already spoken, so he goes to the bottom of the stack. And then is our tradition is to have new speakers. So it's Gary, Yusef, Gene, and I believe Raj wants to speak as well. So
should we turn off the recording, Raj?
I think we'll leave it on and then let Mehmet do that. Terminate. Mehmet can edit the recording and take it off.
Yeah. Hi, this is Gary. I have nothing to add to the entire conversation that just went on the last couple of hours. I definitely want to thank Gloria for showing up and giving what I think was a dynamite presentation about, given that she had to probably figure out what's been going on for the last 96 hours and try to crunch it into the discussion that we had this morning. I just want to call, in terms of international stuff, I want to call people's attention to a couple of factoids that emerged over the last 2 to 3 weeks. One of them takes place in West Africa, and France is making the imperial military rounds again in many countries there. And I think they're trying to either supplement or supplant the United States AFRICOM operation in those regions of the country. The second factoid has to do with Germany. And for the first time in 117 years, since 1903, the Germans are trying to establish a geopolitical presence in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The last time they did that in 1903, they almost went to war with the United States. So I just want to call people's attention to those factoids, because they'll be getting in our face pretty soon. That's all I got to say.
Okay, well, let me first say, do you hear me? Well,
Yes, yes, we hear you.
Okay. Now, let me say, I am a naturalized citizen from Turkey, which is a Muslim majority Turkey. I'm active in left politics. I have social security, Medicare, Medicaid.
Yusuf,
So,
it is difficult to understand what you're saying, for me at least. I expect that is this the same problem as yesterday?
okay, I'll change my headset.
Don't hear you.
No sound. You're
No sound.
muted.
Yusuf, you're muted. Unmute yourself, Yusuf.
Okay, do you hear me?
That's good. Go ahead.
Okay, so there's some imperfections in the Bluetooth. Okay, okay. I don't think I have to repeat what I said, but these are those three things I find a Trump administration imminent. So I really find, and there are people in worse condition, more precarious conditions, people of color, people whose immigration status is in question or less secure. So I think it's a disservice to tell these people that, well, there's no difference, or that Biden is the real threat. Let me emphasize that. And second, the bourgeoisie is inherently a contradictory, as inherent contradictions. It can't do away with the working class. That's how it makes its profits, yet it's obviously in conflict with the working class. And they're in conflict with each other. And so I think it is legitimate for communists to, and that's with a small c, to make use, to use this as leverage to dialect, analyze these things. Marx wrote 3 volumes about the class struggles in France. One is the class struggle in France, the Civil War in France, and the 18th Brumaire. And it's about contradictions within the propertied classes. So Marx didn't say, oh, well, those are all propertied classes. Those are all our enemy. There's the Communist Party. Forget about the rest. No, that's dialectical. He wrote 3 volumes, and you could bet your boots it wasn't for nothing. So I think what's going on is important. Yes, Trump doesn't represent fascism, but it represents a step towards fascism. It represents an imminent danger. But that doesn't mean we should struggle a further struggle. It gives us we took a slight breath. That's enough. Now forward and struggle with what's coming. And Biden didn't say anything about relevant to us about changes in foreign policy. It's good that he respects science a little, and that the climate accords, and so those are okay. That's good, but that's certainly not enough. And I would like to thank Gloria for beginning, for acknowledging the danger of Trump. And there's really nothing I really disagree with Gloria, although I might take a different approach. Let me also make a comment to Mark. We'll have maybe you and me a conversation about about the Communist Party. Well, there are some differences between the Communist Party in 2015 and now. Listen to what we say. CPUSA says now. Listen carefully. And Gloria, let me also say that I am an associate member of the Communist Party of Turkey, which has fraternal relations with your party, and so my salute. If you have any comments about what I say, they are most welcome.
I'd love to, but I'd love to hear I'd love to listen more to people. I appreciate what you were saying. I'd love to comment on it later, but I kind of feel I've been talking too much.
Okay, who's next?
I think Jean is next on the list. And I just want to mention, first of all, say that Gloria, we've always had a close relationship with PSL and Answer, and we want to continue that. And you have an open invitation to come back at sometime next year when things are quiet down, hopefully, because a lot of important theoretical issues we like to talk about. And I also thank Yusuf for mentioning those important works from Karl Marx that we need to study. But I also want to mention a very important passage that Marx made in his speech to the First International, where it said that the point of this is working class solidarity. We need to identify with our fellow workers in other countries and not with our bourgeoisie. And he said further that that means that workers must become experts in foreign policy and foreign affairs and not leave this to the capitalists. And so I want to, in that connection, I want to say that workers really do need to become experts in foreign affairs. And they need to understand, for example, that any job losses, that their jobs are owned by the capitalists. And if the capitalists take it some other country, that's the fault of their capitalists, not the workers in other countries. And we need to, and in particular, we need to have more solidarity with the workers in China, in my view, because, they are in control of their society in spite of what many people may think. And the Communist Party does represent them. And under this arrangement, workers in China have quadrupled their income in the last 20 years. So maybe we need to take some lessons from that. But I'll pass on to the next speaker.
I think it's me. So my question to Gloria and Richard is this. I mean, I see, and I acknowledge, and I think Yusuf's comments are very, very similar to mine. The thing here is Biden and the Democrats had proposed, I mean, even before this election or during the election, when the crisis hit, a $4 trillion package, which had a lot more for the working people, poor people who are struggling. So I think they are going to try to placate this group while they work with with imperialist capital, the finance capital. So this is how they'll operate. I don't think they'll get very far. So the crisis will deepen in 4 years. And then there is a danger of rise of, again, another Trump, if not Trump himself, a figure like Trump, and maybe further to the right in white supremacy again, which is, I think, is how fascism will appear, is in the garb of white supremacy, which we already saw some signs of. So clearly the question becomes is, if the workers have to move towards socialist parties, first of all, they have to see that neither of these two parties will give them anything. I mean, used to be that the Republican Party was more a party of the petty bourgeoisie and some white workers, and the Democratic Party used to be a party of unionized workers. So now things have shifted because unions are weakened, jobs shifted to China. So I think one of the thing I see is that when the American left identifies too much with China as supporting China rather than their own working class. I don't mean against China, but the fact is that American workers have lost their jobs. And where did they go? They went they went to automation. That's number one reason. Number two reason is they shifted to low-wage countries, of which the largest was job loss to China. So how do you bring those workers back? And if one keeps on supporting China in the international solidarity and so forth, I see there is a conflict in the communist position in the United States that it does not, I don't think it will succeed in bringing all the workers to their side unless they have a position that can be defended as in their interest and not be like Trump's, which is we will penalize China and so forth. It has to be a communist position. So what is that position in your opinion? I'd like you to sort of explain that a little more.
I would like to respond to that. I think it's a provocative question, a good question. I think without a full internationalist position on any question in the world, when a crisis arrives, that all of a sudden we're told by the media and the US government that this is a crisis that we must intervene in, or that we can see as socialists that is being developed an argument for example, Yugoslavia. It was months of intense demonization of Milosevic, and what then exploded into Clinton's bombing that began in March of 1999, and what ended up being the destruction of a country that many on the left fell for. We didn't in that time, in the group we were in before, but the anti-war movement just failed completely. And I want to raise the issue of Mexico. When Sanders was running in 2016, and the issue was just on the front burner about immigrants. And you saw that's how Trump launched his campaign. The very day he announced it in 2015 was Mexicans are rapists, murderers, thieves, and that you're going to build a wall and Mexico will pay for it. I mean, that was his opening shot and that was his theme. And yeah, that was a big part of why he got elected. And then you had someone like Biden who was saying, we need to have rights. And then the Democrats said, oh, the DACA kids. Well, the DACA, what about their parents? I mean, that was such an easy fallback to say the DACA because, they're college educated or they were babies when they came in. It's not their fault. Or they're in the military, doing service to the empire. That was the answer of the Democrats. That was a failing argument to defend immigrants and to fight the argument. As hard as it may be for socialists sometimes to buck those waves, Jorge Ramos, who's a very right-wing Mexican journalist on Univision, thoroughly anti-Venezuela and Cuba, but he's very pro-immigrant, and he interviewed Sanders and said, well, the others are against open borders. What is your stance? And he was, of course, for open borders, meaning let the immigrants who are here become legal, let people come in on a legal process. And Sanders said, we can't have open borders. He said, I support immigrant rights, but we can't have open borders because then people will come in. They'll flood the country. Well, that's a racist notion because the borders are open. And this is what I say, the borders are open and people were forced here by the 6 million immediately after the signing of NAFTA, which destroyed Mexico's economy. That US capital left with millions of jobs, exported to Mexico, took over their agriculture, hurt people in this country all across the board. And who benefited was Ford Motor Company, the agribusiness. It hurt everyone here and it hurt Mexicans. You can't expect Mexicans to starve on their land in order to satisfy the needs of big capital. I really think that was a more winning argument for people to understand and to realize they can't fall for those arguments. I think the thing with China is there's 110 pieces of active legislation against China in US Congress, also sponsored by the Democrats. They are proponents of aggression against China, the pivot to Asia that Obama announced. It's kind of an unbroken chain of this action of imperialism. It may be expressed in different ways, but we have to be able to, as workers, as a workers' party, explain to workers why internationalism is important. I was at I'm a delegate to the San Francisco Labor Council, and just a few short years ago, someone brought up a resolution for Turkish journalists who were under attack. And it was a resolution calling for the San Francisco Labor Council to support the Turkish, workers. And these building trades who tend to be more conservative got up and said, why the hell are we doing this? This isn't about unions. And I got up and I said, it's time that we stop accepting US government foreign policy pretext for war and for aggression and for not understanding that the workers in the world are our brothers and sisters. And I said, didn't the AFL-CIO accept the argument that Vietnam was a necessary war, and on and on and on? And I said, it's time that workers have our own foreign policy and examine things from our own interests. And people accepted that. They liked it. And I think what we have to do is find ways to defend those who must be defended against imperialism, which is basically anyone who's a target of US imperialism and all its expressions, economic, financial, so on. And that includes Venezuela. A lot of leftists don't know what to make of Venezuela. A lot of liberals attack Venezuela because of what they hear in the New York Times, which is the worst media attacking Venezuela with just ridiculous coverage. We have to find a way to counter that. And I think the same with China. By the way, we're part of something called Pivot to Peace, which I think is an enormously important project led by Chinese academics, intellectuals, activists, starting in the Bay Area, but across the country. It's called pivottopeace.org. It's a very, very good website and coalition that has formed to say that it's not a matter of saying, oh, we support the Chinese government. It's stop the warmongering, stop the race baiting against China. And I think that's a very good response to the attacks on China.
I urge the attempt to let people know that their job, whether it is what's called a privately owned job, as though it's not related to the United States, their job, their work, their being a housewife, good, I can't remember the word. Whatever their job is, relates to preserving the capitalist system and relates to the profiting of our owners, the capitalists. There is no exclusion on the basis of, oh, I think otherwise. I do consider people doing cooperatives as being important in our work for change, but all of the jobs profit our owners. We have to see ourselves as an enslaved society. We are not free. We have attained certain freedoms, but we have not been made able to take care of ourselves in healthy, comfortable ways that feel good and are sufficient. Most people are living on an edge of something of trying to get along. We have to convince people that they are in pain from the system, and that's what we're trying to overcome, and that when there is competition from other places that are at least trying to gain a release from their own oppression or an improvement of the struggles that they've been making for liberation, for national liberation, that those are the same struggles that we are having here, regardless what they're called. People don't get it. I mean, you know, I'm 85 and I've been through it long enough. It took me 60 years to start talking about what's wrong. The thing about school being such an oppressive way of organizing ourselves, instead of living integrated, age integrated, where we develop all our knowledge and skills and abilities together, regardless of our age. You can't tell a room of 30 people, children, that they all should be reading this bit of history, or they all should be doing this calculation, or they all should be learning their ABCs. You don't know what they need en masse like that. So the whole approach and walking into the school because a bell rang and leaving the school because a bell rang, the whole bringing the working class into servitude is what the school is about. So,
Hey, Gloria, can I raise a question?
so help people identify their anguish.
I had a question to ask. There was something that came up on the chat board, maybe some clarification on how you view the progressive Democrats, the sort of the you know, the squad. The point that Michael was making is that there are millions of people that are involved in the Democratic Party. Then shouldn't we be involved in the Democratic Party? And kind of related to that, what do you think about the safe state strategy that a lot of people were advocating during the election to vote for Biden in states where it was in contention?
Well, first on the safe states, we examined the states that we would try to get on in terms of where we have people, where we thought we could accomplish it, the schedule, the timing. And in Florida, which is, you know, quote, a safe state, a battleground state, we had been knocked off the ballot in 2016, really illegally by the Attorney General. So this year, early on, last year, our attorney filed the suit on our behalf and for other third parties. We didn't win that suit, but strangely, we got placed on the ballot because we are a state party in Florida. You can actually register to vote PSL, interestingly. And so we were on the ballot there. We just found that we have 6,000 votes there, which is a pretty damn good vote in Florida. But we weren't on in states like Michigan. It was way too hard to do. We didn't avoid them because of fear of the issue of safe states. Yeah. We really didn't. We didn't think that was, you know, when you look at our vote, it's very small compared to libertarians, for example. Nobody attacks the libertarians, by the way. It's very interesting. People only attack the socialists. I'm not saying people who question our role. The liberals were attacking us. They didn't attack the libertarian, which is, they got way, I think she got more than 1 million votes, substantially more. Yeah. They're more known. That word libertarian has different meanings for people. The Greens got more than us in most of the states. They were on in 30 states. We are a decidedly socialist party, a Marxist-Leninist party. And so we were of a different kind. And I think that getting on 15 states, again, was pretty remarkable. we were on in Minnesota, which is a battleground state. Okay, I'm gonna tell you where we were on. Arkansas, Colorado, California, District of Columbia, thanks to a lawsuit, Illinois, Louisiana, Minnesota, New Jersey, New Mexico, Tennessee, Utah, Vermont, Florida. That's all I can remember right now. And so the purpose was to build our organization, reach out to the working class. We only got a number of, in Utah we were on. We didn't get hardly any media at all, as much as we struggled for it, organized for it, sent media, called media. Mm-hmm. We got at the most local TV like Salt Lake, Las Cruces, New Mexico, Albuquerque, a little bit of that, but it was much less accessible than last time. This time it was really locked down. I think the issue of progressive people being in the Democratic Party, it is what it is. It's if people or certain organizations participate. I imagine that some Communist Party members or associates participate in the Democratic Party. We don't, but that's other organizations' choice, and I'm sure they play a very important role in the Democratic Party. We don't see participating in the Democratic Party as useful. I think with Bernie Sanders, we have to take everything in this concrete situation. As the Bernie Sanders campaign was developing this year, we saw it as very, very hopeful for raising the consciousness of millions of people to see that, yes, it's necessary to have free healthcare or Medicare for all, as he said. That's a very big step forward, by the way, from what took place before Obama. And remember that what the media, what the advertisements, what the companies, what the government tried to invoke upon us was, you don't want the government interfering in your right to health care. That's a private choice. You can't choose your doctor. I mean, that defeated the 1996 single payer plan here in California. 77% of the working class defeated it because of myths. But then after Obamacare, after the Affordable Care Act, there was a sudden switch in the consciousness of workers. I don't think people have written enough about that. I saw that as a union person, my workers, that all of a sudden it was like, we need healthcare. And that argument about private healthcare and that government healthcare is bad for you, all of a sudden it's like, okay, but then how are we going to pay for it? It was, I think things are changing. So I think, I appreciate people. I think that the more progressive leaning Congress people can play a role. I think they'll find themselves forced into compromises, as they get closer to some sort of victory. But I mean, we don't see that as our role at all. And
Gloria, this is local. I just want to say that it's past 1 o'clock. If you want to stay on and others want to stay on, that's fine. I have to leave. Thank you very much. But it's just a little past 1 o'clock. And I have to stop recording at this point because I have to leave. But I can leave the program on and people can still interact.
Okay, thanks, Raj, and thanks, Gloria. This was excellent. And I'm sure we're going to put the whole thing up on the web, I hope. But
well, I want to say one last little thing. I think for us, if we were to go into the Democratic Party, I mean, just hypothetically, then it would be looking the other way when the Democrats are doing things and finding excuses for what they're doing. And instead, we've been free and clear to talk about socialism. I've been in campaigns since 1980, and I can tell you that this has been completely different. The attitude of people. They ask you questions. They ask, what is it? engage in discussion with you as a legitimate ideology to talk about. And they may disagree, but they didn't slough you off or say you're the enemy like before. And I think that this is the ideology of the workers. It's their instinct in their role in labor, and exploited by the capitalists. And I think that's where we have to go, is to have confidence that the workers will embrace socialism.
Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses. Since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums, please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICSS Sunday, SUNDAY, at yahoo.com, and the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or directly or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml at marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.